Well, it's day 21 of Israel's assault on Gaza. Israeli warplanes attacked 40 targets across Gaza overnight as Israeli troops backed by tanks have pushed deep into the heart of Gaza City. The Quds hospital in Gaza is now empty after it had to be evacuated because of a fire caused by a tank shell on Thursday. The evacuees included sick and wounded patients on stretchers and wheelchairs. Meanwhile, thousands of Gazans are expected to turn out to the funeral of a top Hamas leader who was killed on Thursday. Hamas Interior Minister Saeed Sayam was killed along with his son, brother, and two other Hamas officials when his brother's house in Gaza City was bombed. The Israeli army has closed all access to the West Bank for the next 2 days following a call by Hamas for Palestinians to observe what it called a day of wrath by staging anti-Israeli protests at Friday prayers.
Since Israel started its bombardment of Gaza, over 1,100 Palestinians have been killed, more than 5,200 wounded. At least 700 civilians are among the dead, including more than 350 children. 13 Israelis have died, 10 of them soldiers, including 4 by so-called friendly fire. The Palestinian Statistics Bureau is reporting Israel's assault has cost the Palestinian economy at least $1.4 billion. The Bureau said 26,000 Gazans were unable to live in their homes and were being housed in temporary shelter. Much of Gaza's infrastructure lies in ruins. 20,000 residential buildings have been damaged. 4,000 have been destroyed. On the diplomatic front, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon met with Palestinian officials in the West Bank city of Ramallah and urged Israel to declare a unilateral ceasefire. Meanwhile, Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni is due to meet with Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice in Washington today, and an Israeli envoy was sent to Cairo to discuss ceasefire terms offered by Hamas. Hamas is reported to be offering a year-long truce if Israel withdraws from Gaza and lifts its blockade. Rashid Khalidi is with us now. He's the Edward Said Professor of Arab Studies and the director of the Middle East Institute at Columbia University here in New York. His forthcoming book is called Sowing Crisis: The Cold War and American Hegemony in the Middle East. He joins us here in our Firehouse studio. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Juan.
Your analysis of what's happening in Gaza right now.
Well, the United States is allowing Israel to continue, as it has in every war that I can remember, to move forward. In this case, move forward over, in effect, the bodies of women and children. As you mentioned, over 300 of the killed are children. 55% of the population of Gaza are children. So every tank shell, every artillery shell, every bombardment risks killing children, and a huge proportion of the casualties are civilians. We don't know how many because there are probably people buried in ruins of neighborhoods that the Israeli army makes too unsafe for rescue people to go into.
And Israel just says if Hamas stops shelling southern Lebanon with its rockets, they'll stop.
They do. They have carried out one of the most brilliant propaganda campaigns I have ever seen, long before this began. The dehumanization of the Palestinians and the demonization of Hamas laid the groundwork for this. They did what I call clearing the crime scene before the crime by removing all witnesses. When I was in Jerusalem in November, Western journalists were complaining bitterly to me that they couldn't get into Gaza. And of course, there are no Western journalists in Gaza because they've basically carried out the recommendations of the Winograd report that was issued after their war in Lebanon in 2006, one of which was you have to control the media. You have to make sure that you manipulate, control images. And they've done a brilliant job of that, at least in this country and to a lesser extent in Israel. The rest of the world sees what's going on because they're taking the feeds by Palestinian journalists in Gaza, and the pictures and the images by themselves, and the numbers that you recited tell the story. On the other hand, we have the New York Times, which had an article this morning on the bombardment of the United Nations headquarters, the destruction of the entire food and medical supplies of the United Nations, and which managed to give 10 paragraphs to Israel's justification for an attack on the United Nations. I mean, even for the Times, that's a kind of a record.
The lack of outcry by even Arab governments across the Middle East on this, your sense of what the role of the relationship of the Arab governments is to the street, to the Arab street right now?
Well, they're democratic, authoritarian, autocratic governments. They rule in spite of and against the will of their peoples. They have clearly separated themselves, those who have, in effect, supported or tacitly supported this Israeli offensive because they desired to see Hamas weakened, governments like that of Egypt. And they are braving popular discontent. There have been quite major demonstrations in places like Alexandria, 50, 60,000 people, which is unusual for Egypt because there are a million Mukhabarat secret police. They're huge. I was in Cairo 2 weeks ago. When the president moves, literally tens of thousands of security people flood the streets. And those are the kinds of regimes that are supporting, in effect, tacitly supporting this Israeli operation.
We actually have video of you in Egypt that came over Reuters. A week before Israel launched its assault on Gaza, you warned against expecting major changes from Obama's White House. This is what you said in Cairo in mid-December.
The lethal combination of the fear of appearing soft on terrorism, which has sort of replaced the fear of being soft on communism in American public discourse, together with the unparalleled clout of the American military-industrial complex, may unfortunately help to prolong the agony brought on by the current heavy American footprint in the Middle East, whatever intentions President Obama may have.
Can you elaborate on this?
Well, we have a absolutely huge presence in the Middle East, unprecedentedly large. Never since World War II has the United States had such an enormous presence. At the height of the Cold War, when the United States was ostensibly facing a formidable rival, the United States did not have these many troops, this many bases, and so on and so forth. There's an enormous investment in that. That is something that I think has to be addressed at the root. Why do we have so many forces in these countries? It is very unpopular. Overwhelming majorities of Iraqis in every poll that I have ever seen are against our military presence in Iraq. And I think you'd find the same kinds of numbers in most other countries. This is one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is the stranglehold of conventional wisdom in Washington as far as what is to be done. It is distressing to see the same people who have engineered the failures of American policy over 3, you could even say 4, back to Reagan, successive administrations being considered for positions in the Obama administration, dealing with Middle East policy. These are not just retreads. These are people who have comprehensively failed. In fact, many of them have written memoirs talking about how and why they failed. Let us just read what they say and see why we should never put these people anywhere near the levers of power. Well, the most preeminent among them is Dennis Ross. There are others.